I'll call you when I get out. If I'm not out in 2 weeks, you'll know where to look for me. Take it easy. Be good. When I heard Vaughn's car driving off down the road, I knew it was going to be the last man-made sound I would hear for 2 weeks. It was late fall, and I was setting out to cross the Sierra Nevada on foot. I've loved these mountains since I was a kid, and I'd been planning this trip for a long time. You have to plan. You can't just get up one morning and head off into the hills, not if you're used to harvesting your food in supermarkets. You have to know the ways of the people who'd called these mountains home, how they gathered food, made tools, navigated by the sun and by the stars, how they took what they needed from the hills without destroying them. So I studied for a long time, and I made a lot of shorter trips for practice. Then one day I knew I was ready. I packed a knife, a few tools, and one thin dime for that phone call I'd be making when I got across. Of course, I still had doubts. I had 70 miles of wilderness, icy rivers, and deep snow to cross, on foot, with no food, no matches, and no compass. But this was a challenge I had to face, and I wanted to do it alone. There's one thing about living in the wilderness. Life gets reduced to very simple things, like making a shelter or finding food or just staying warm. Sometimes it seems like you're spending a lot of time just taking care of basics, but the rewards are simple and immediate too. A couple of hours spent on making a good shelter, for instance, can mean the difference between a good night's sleep and shivering all night on a bed of rocks and pine cones. The same is true for finding food. You've got to give it time. The Shoshone Indians used to catch fish with their hands, just by reaching in under creek banks or rocks, stroking the fish's belly, and pulling it out. Of course, you have to know fish and know where they'd be likely to sleep or to hide. And you can't be squeamish about sticking your hands blindly into slimy places. But you don't have to be faster than the fish, just smarter. And remember, you hold the element of surprise. Sometimes. But the important thing is not to give up. You've got to believe you can do it. Starting a fire with a firebow looks easy until you've tried it once. and then it seems impossible until you've actually made it work for yourself. It takes dry tinder, a good fire set, and a lot of faith. You've just got to believe it really can be done. After a few failures the first night, I found myself wishing I'd brought along some matches. But I'd done it before, and I knew I could do it again if I just kept trying. It only takes a single spark and a very gentle touch. Until that first night, I never really knew how much a friend a fire can be. That little circle of light was like a home in the middle of the wilderness. I found myself wondering just what I was doing there. I felt like I was a million miles away from the life I was used to. Most of all, I missed the sounds of other people, and my imagination turned every sound I could hear into a threat. Of course, the mountains weren't really threatening me. They were ignoring me. Maybe that's why I felt so alone. The next morning, I couldn't even remember what had bothered me so much the night before. I was excited all over again and could hardly wait to get started. But leaving a campsite without putting things back the way you found them is like, well, like carving your initials in a tree or painting your name on a rock. Someone once called that leaving a monument to yourself. So I covered up all my traces, and I still got an early start. Ahead was a whole mountain range to cross, and less than 2 weeks to do it in. The farther away you get from the city, the more you begin to see and hear and taste and smell the wilderness. After a few days, you can pick out small things that you might have missed only a week before. I remember day after day of walking and feeling my feet stop aching and my body grow stronger. Then one day, I realized I wasn't in a hurry anymore. After about a week, the only companions I needed were the sounds of the mountains and my own thoughts. But I was alone, and I realized that more than ever when I hit my first real obstacle. The Kern River was fuller than I hoped it would be that late in the year. I couldn't find a place to walk across, and there wasn't any way around it, so that left me with two choices: cross it right there, or turn around and go home. And that was really no choice at all. Whatever happened, I was on my own to make it across. Sometimes you've just got to take a chance and trust yourself. I thought about building a raft, but that would have taken a lot of time, and I didn't really think it would be necessary. All I had to do was hang on to my end of the rope, and I would be washed down and across the river like a giant pendulum. My big worry was the water temperature. It was about 40 degrees, and that's cold. It can cramp your muscles and make you numb. So I had to get across quickly, or I'd lose control and wind up going for a swim in the rapids. Finally, I secured everything as well as I could. I thought about the river, how strong the current was, and how cold it would be. And then there was nothing left to do but get in. Once you've gone through something you were afraid of, the idea of doing it again doesn't seem as frightening. I didn't mind the idea of crossing another river, but as I sat there shivering and trying to get dry, I kept thinking, next time I'm going to build a raft. I camped in one place for a couple of days to gather food and to get ready for the high mountains ahead. When your life depends on the things you do and how you do them, you've got to take the time to do each thing the best you can. I wasn't looking forward to spending a night in the snow, but I figured that if I was prepared, I could get across the deep snow in one long day of walking. What I needed took a combination of time and a little mountain-grown ingenuity. All it took was willow branches, yucca leaves, and an idea. That's the amazing thing about living in the wilderness. You find out you can do things you never thought you could. I wasn't sure I could build snowshoes until I did it. At first I hoped I wouldn't need them, but when I was done, I couldn't wait to try them out. You haven't felt real solitude until you've been alone, surrounded by the silence and stillness of mountain snow. I remember thinking, I'm really here, walking in snowshoes that I built, across snow that no other human being will ever see. I enjoyed having it all to myself. It took me almost a full day's walking to realize that I wasn't going to be out of the snow before nightfall. The clouds began to look very threatening, and I still had miles to go. I headed downhill to see if I could find a protected place where the snow might not be so deep. It takes more than a campfire to stay warm on a cold, snowy night in the mountains. I decided to build a fire bed, a technique the Indians use to survive in the winter. The idea is to sink stones into the ground, heat them until they're red hot, then cover them with dirt. It takes time and it takes a lot of hard work, but if your life depends on it, you don't mind the work as much. And anyway, the digging keeps you warm. Sometimes I imagined myself frozen stiff, being discovered after the first spring thaw. But part of me kept saying, trust yourself. You know what you have to do, and you're doing it. They say the person who is likely to survive in the wilderness is the one who believes he will and takes some sort of direct action. If you think you're not going to make it, you probably won't. I decided then and there that I was going to make it. That first warm day in the hills 2 weeks back, I'd seen some cattails growing, and I picked them for an evening just like this one. I needed some way to keep my body from losing heat while I waited for the fire bed to be ready. The seeds inside worked just like down. I kept thinking, just one more night. Make it through tonight, and tomorrow you can be sleeping in a warm bed. As the night got colder, it helped to have that to look forward to. A firebed can't be hurried. You have to wait at least an hour before the dirt heats up, but it seems more like 10 when you're cold. I kept going over everything in my mind. Did I heat up the stones enough? Did I cover them with enough dirt, or too much? For the bed to stay warm all night, everything had to be perfect. The steam rising from the dirt told me the firebed was ready. I was surrounded by snow. The wind was blowing. It was below freezing. And I was going to stay warm all night. The firebed stayed warm right through the next morning, and I was in no hurry at all to get out of it. It was my last day in the Sierra. I'd stopped counting the days, and it was almost a surprise to realize that my trip would soon be over. In just a few hours, I'd be standing on the highway, waiting for Vaughn to pick me up. Suddenly I was in a hurry again. I wanted to be there, on the other side of the mountains. 2 weeks ago, I hadn't really been sure that I could make it. But now I knew that I had met the challenge I'd set for myself. and I felt it was true more and more with every step I took. It was going to take a while to get used to cars and people and city things again. I'd come a long way in the last 2 weeks, and I didn't want to lose what I'd found in the mountains. But I wanted to go home now and find out if this feeling would last. This feeling that one step at a time, I could make it over anything.